Admiral Clara Stone stared out the bridge of the Eagle's Fury, watching as the dark vastness of space stretched endlessly. Before her, the stars seemed distant, cold, and indifferent to the looming storm that was about to hit humanity. Earth's last line of defense was now the home of one of the most advanced warships ever built, but even that might not be enough against the threat that had arrived. The Vraks, a ruthless alien race with technology far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Their massive fleets had already laid waste to several colonies, and now they were turning their sights to Earth itself. Stone knew this was their moment of reckoning, the moment that would define humanity's future. But as the tension in the air thickened, she couldn't afford to let fear show. The fate of billions rested on her decisions. The crew of the Eagle's Fury were all fully aware of what was at stake, and the energy on the bridge was palpable. Their faces were a mix of resolve and nervousness, but Stone trusted them. All she knew that in the darkest of times, humans had always found a way to adapt and fight back. She just had to trust in the one weapon that they had that no one else did. Their railguns, humanity's secret weapon, a weapon that could pierce the toughest armor and break through the most powerful shields. It was the edge they needed to level the playing field against the Vraks. It wasn't just their last hope, it was their only hope. Stone took a deep breath as the distant figures of the alien fleet began to emerge on the monitors. Their ships, huge hulking masses of metal and energy, each one capable of devastating entire cities with a single blast. But Stone was undeterred. She stood up from her command chair and walked over to the tactical display of a huge holographic projection of the enemy fleet swirling in front of her. She studied their positions, the trajectory of their ships, and the movements of their formations. They were preparing to strike. She glanced over at Captain Jones, her trusted second-in-command. His face was grim, but his eyes were focused. "Status report," Stone asked, her voice steady. "All systems online. Admiral, shields at full power, railguns calibrated and ready to fire," Jones replied with a nod. "We're as ready as we're ever going to be." Stone took one more look at the enemy fleet before turning to face her crew. "This is it, people," she said, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "We either hold this line or we lose everything. This is humanity's last stand. We fight for our homes, for our families, for the future of our species, and we do it with everything we have. Do you understand?" A chorus of affirmations rang out from the crew, each person's voice filled with determination and resolve. Stone felt a surge of pride. Her crew was ready for this. They were ready to fight. The doors to the bridge slid open, and Lieutenant Rogers entered with the latest intelligence report. "Admiral," he said, "the Vraks commander has issued a demand for surrender. They've given us 1 hour to comply before they begin their assault." Stone met his gaze, her eyes cold and unwavering. "They can take that demand and shove it straight into the void," she said flatly. "Prepare to engage the enemy and give them a welcome they'll never forget." The crew scrambled to their stations, and the hum of the ship's engines seemed to grow louder as the Eagle's Fury surged forward into the fray. The stars outside seemed to warp as the ship powered up its weapons. The moment of truth had arrived. Stone took her seat at the helm, and as the first blast of alien fire lit up the space ahead of them, she ordered the railguns to fire and humanity's fight for survival began. The Eagle's Fury surged through the cold vacuum of space, its engines roaring as it raced toward the incoming Vraks fleet. The massive ships loomed ahead like dark behemoths, blocking out the stars. They were a sight to behold, their hulking forms bristling with weapons and shields that pulsed with dangerous energy. It was a sight that could have made even the bravest warrior hesitate. But not Stone. She stared ahead with unwavering focus. The fate of humanity was in her hands, and she would not falter. The first strike came without warning. A massive bolt of plasma energy sliced through the darkness and slammed into the ship's shields. The impact shuddered through the entire vessel and sent a ripple of alarms through the bridge. Stone gritted her teeth. As the warning lights flickered, she glanced over to her chief engineer, Lieutenant Parker, who was working frantically at his console, his face pale but determined. "How's the shield strength?" Stone asked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Holding steady for now, Admiral, but we can't take many more of those," Parker replied, his hands moving with practiced speed as he adjusted power levels. "The Vraks' weapons are powerful, but we're holding out for the moment." Stone nodded, her gaze fixed on the tactical screen. As the Vrax fleet advanced closer, she could see the alien ships now forming a tight formation, their weapons charging, and their shields flickering with deadly intent. "Target their lead ship." She ordered full power to the railguns. "Prepare to fire on my mark." "Railguns are locked and ready," Admiral Jones replied, his eyes scanning the readouts. Stone's fingers tightened on the armrest of her chair. She could feel her pulse quicken as the seconds ticked by. The Vrax were closing in fast, too fast. The pressure was mounting, but she couldn't afford to hesitate. The time for waiting was over. The first salvo from the alien ships came crashing down, a barrage of energy blasts that tore through the empty void like a storm of death. But Stone was ready. She gave the order. "Fire." The railguns fired in perfect unison, the massive projectiles streaking through space with a blinding flash of light. The first shot slammed into the lead Vrax ship, its shields flaring as the railgun slug tore through them. With ease, the alien ship shuddered violently as the projectile punched through its hull and exploded in a shower of debris. Stone's breath caught in her throat for a brief moment. The sight of the massive explosion in the distance filled her with a sense of triumph. But there was no time for celebration. Another barrage of plasma fire came crashing in toward the ship's position, this time much more concentrated and accurate. "Evasive maneuvers," Stone barked. "Angle shields to port, full speed ahead." The Eagle's Fury banked sharply to the left as the plasma bolts exploded around them. The ship's hull groaned as the shields absorbed the impact, but Stone could feel the strain. The Vrax were adapting quickly, their tactics more refined than she expected, but Stone wasn't about to let them take the upper hand. "Fire again," she ordered, her voice firm as ever. The second salvo from the railguns screamed out into the cold dark of space, and this time they hit their target with deadly precision. The second Vrax ship erupted into flames, its engines no longer functioning as it was sent spiraling into the void. The impact was devastating. The enemy fleet was beginning to feel the weight of humanity's weapons. "Direct hit, Admiral, 2 down," Jones reported, a satisfied grin creeping onto his face. Stone allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Vrax fleet was vast, and their weapons were powerful. They wouldn't be defeated so easily, but humanity had made its mark, and it was enough to make the Vrax take notice. The fight had only just begun, and Stone was ready to lead her crew to victory. The Vrax fleet began to respond with a level of coordination that made Stone's stomach tighten. Their ships no longer blindly charging in, but instead working in tandem, shifting and darting with practiced precision. The overwhelming firepower of their ships seemed endless, and Stone realized they had underestimated how quickly the enemy could adapt to human tactics. What had worked before was no longer enough. The first wave of railgun shots had struck hard, but now the Vraxes were learning from each impact, weaving between asteroid fields and using evasive patterns. Stone knew they had to rethink their strategy if they were going to survive this battle. "Adjust targeting algorithms," Stone barked, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to change how we lock on to their shields." "Adapting now," Admiral Jones replied, his fingers flying across the control panel. Stone's mind raced through every possible scenario. She had anticipated a hard fight, but this felt different. The Vrax were too organized, too well coordinated. They had learned to dodge the railguns, and their counterattacks were beginning to take a toll. The Eagle's Fury was starting to show signs of damage, minor cracks in the hull, and several internal systems running on backup power, but nothing that would stop them. Yet the problem was that the Vrax weren't retreating. They were pushing forward, relentless and calculating. The next barrage came quicker than she expected, a wave of plasma that hit the ship's shields with a deafening impact. It was followed by another and another. The Eagle's Fury rocked under the onslaught, and Stone gripped her chair, her eyes narrowed. She needed to find a way to hit them hard again. But the next shot from the railguns had to count. They didn't have many opportunities left. "Commander, we need to pull back," Lieutenant Rogers said, his voice shaking slightly as he looked at the damage reports. "The Vrax fleet is too strong. We can't keep up with this level of firepower." Stone shot him a hard look, her mind racing. They couldn't afford to retreat, not now. They had to find the weakness in the enemy's formation. She looked at the tactical map and saw something she hadn't noticed before. The enemy fleet had formed a tight cluster around their flagship. It was a vulnerable spot, an opening if they could get close enough to exploit it. "Get us into position now," she ordered without hesitation. "We're going in." The Eagle's Fury surged forward, weaving between the massive ships as the crew worked in unison. With precise timing, they avoided the enemy fire and darted into the gap between the nearest Vrax vessels. The ship's engines roared as it pushed toward the center of the enemy formation. Stone could feel the adrenaline surge through her body. Every second counted, every move could be their last. "Railguns charged and ready," Jones called out from his station. "Fire at the flagship now," Stone commanded, her voice unwavering, even as the ship rocked under another barrage. The railguns roared to life, and the projectiles shot forward with deadly precision. This time, there was no room for error. The first shot hit the flagship's shields, but the second struck true. The shields collapsed under the force of the blast, and the projectile drove deep into the heart of the alien ship. The explosion was immense, lighting up space as the flagship erupted in a ball of fire. "Direct hit, flagship destroyed," Jones shouted with a grin. Stone allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction, but she knew this wasn't over. The enemy fleet had taken a blow, but they weren't done yet. The Vrax were formidable and would retaliate with everything they had. Stone's heart pounded in her chest as she prepared for what came next. The fight for Earth was far from over, but this small victory was a reminder that humanity's will to fight was stronger than any alien force. The moment the flagship of the Vrax fleet exploded, the remaining ships seemed to hesitate for a split second, as if the destruction of their command vessel had thrown them off balance. But Stone knew better. This wasn't over. The Vrax were calculating and ruthless. They would adapt and retaliate in ways they hadn't anticipated. Yet the damage had been done, and Stone could feel the momentum shift. Even if only slightly, humanity had struck a serious blow. But the real challenge was now. The Vrax would be furious, and they would come at them with everything they had. "Stay sharp, everyone," Stone said, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of her command. "They'll adjust their tactics fast. We need to stay ahead of them." "Admiral, we've got incoming," Rogers called out urgently, his hands flying over his console, the tactical display showing the new wave of Vrax ships breaking formation and charging in from multiple directions. "Deploy countermeasures and prepare to fire," Stone ordered without missing a beat. "Focus on the cruisers first. Take out their heavy hitters." The Eagle's Fury shuddered as it evaded the first wave of plasma fire from the new enemy assault. The alien ships were closing in fast, their advanced weapons hammering at the ship's shields. But this time Stone was ready. Her crew was ready. The railguns fired in rapid succession, targeting the closest enemy cruisers. The first shot missed, but the second found its mark. The massive projectile tore through the hull of the alien ship, sending it spiraling into the dark void of space with a massive explosion. "Direct hit on Cruiser 1, Jones reported as the crew cheered, but Stone wasn't listening. She was focused on the next move. Already the Vrax had begun to scatter their forces, making them harder to track, harder to hit. She knew this meant they were preparing something more dangerous, something more coordinated. "They're using a new strategy," Stone said under her breath. The Vrax ships were splitting into smaller groups, each group moving in erratic patterns, as if trying to confuse and overwhelm them at the same time. "They're trying to surround us. Don't let them get close." The Eagle's Fury dodged and weaved between incoming fire, avoiding blasts from multiple directions. The ship rocked with each near miss, but it held together. Stone's heart raced with every pulse of the ship's engines. The crew was working at peak performance, every person doing their job with precision, but Stone could feel the pressure mounting. She knew they couldn't keep up this level of evasion for long. Eventually, the Vrax would corner them or wear them down. "Evasive maneuvers, engage afterburners," she barked, her eyes scanning the tactical readouts, trying to predict the next wave of enemy fire. "We're getting boxed in," Jones said with a strained voice. "They'd got us in a pincer move." Stone's mind raced, and then it clicked. She'd been focusing too much on evasion, and not enough on their strength. Their greatest weapon, the railguns, were designed to destroy heavy ships and powerful defenses, but they were also perfect for dealing with smaller, faster ships. The Vrax were trying to overwhelm them with speed and numbers, but the Eagle's Fury could still hit hard if they just adjusted their approach. "Switch targeting to the smaller ships," Stone commanded. "We'll use the railgun speed to hit them before they get too close. Fire on the smaller groups. Don't waste time aiming for shields, just take them out." The railguns roared to life. Once more, the massive projectiles streaking through space with terrifying speed, and the first shot took out a group of 3 enemy fighters. With a single blast, their remains scattering in a fiery explosion. The next shot hit another small cluster of ships, taking down 5 more in rapid succession. The smaller wrack ships didn't stand a chance against the sheer power of the human weapons. "Great work, team," Stone said with a nod as the crew continued their focused assault. "Keep the pressure on them, don't let up." With each railgun shot, the wrack's fleet began to falter. More and more of their smaller ships were destroyed, and their formations began to fragment. But Stone knew this wasn't the end yet. The wracks had their own surprises waiting. The battle was far from over, but humanity had proven one thing: they could think on their feet and adapt just as quickly as the enemy. The Eagle's fury rocked under the pressure of the enemy fire. The railguns had torn through the smaller wrack ships and disrupted their formations, but with every shot fired, more damage was inflicted on the human warship systems. Flickered on and off. Some of the bridge consoles were barely functional, and the hum of the engines sounded strained. The crew was tired, their nerves fraying as the battle dragged on, but Stone could see the weariness in their faces and in their movements. They were exhausted, but they weren't giving up. The strength of the crew was a testament to humanity's resilience and their determination to survive. "We're taking damage to the aft sections," Parker called out from engineering, his voice tinged with urgency. "Shields are at 40%, and we're losing power to the secondary systems." "We can't keep this up much longer," Rogers said from tactical, his brow furrowed as he watched the screen. "The wracks are pushing harder now. We can't afford to make any mistakes." Stone clenched her jaw as the situation continued to worsen. The wrack's fleet was relentless, and their tactics were evolving by the second. They had already lost 2 of their own ships in the fight, and while it was a victory, it was also a heavy cost. The Eagle's fury was showing signs of damage from every angle. The railguns had been effective, but with every shot fired, they were depleting their ammunition and slowly running out of options. Stone knew they had to end this soon, or they would be overwhelmed. "Can we get a message to the fleet?" Stone asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "The communications array is still functioning at minimal capacity," Rogers replied. "We can send a distress signal, but it will take time for reinforcements to arrive. We're on our own for now." Stone took a deep breath and scanned the tactical display. The wracks were closing in from all sides, but there was still a chance they could break through if they kept hitting hard and fast. The key was to disrupt the enemy's coordination even further. She needed to find a way to break their will to fight, just like they had done with the flagship earlier in the battle. "We're going to take a risk," Stone said decisively. "Prepare for a full charge into their central formation." The crew looked at each other, uncertain for a moment, but then they nodded in unison. Stone could see the resolve in their eyes. They were willing to follow her anywhere. They would fight to the last, if that was what it took. "We'll close the distance and hit them with everything we've got," Stone continued, her voice low but firm. "Once we're in range, we target the largest ships. We can't waste shots on the smaller ones anymore. They're just distractions." The Eagle's fury surged forward, engines firing at full capacity. The ship was already limping with its damaged systems, but it pushed through the strain. Every second felt like a lifetime. The wrack's fleet closed in, but Stone wasn't going to back down. They would force their way through no matter what. As they neared the heart of the enemy formation, a barrage of plasma fire slammed into the ship's side, sending a shockwave through the entire vessel. The Eagle's fury shuddered violently. As the shields weakened under the constant assault, Stone could hear the groaning of the hull as it protested against the incoming damage. But she didn't flinch. Her hand never left the command console. "Fire the railguns," Stone commanded. The ship's railguns responded immediately. The first shot hit a massive wrack's destroyer directly in its central core, and the explosion that followed was catastrophic. The second shot took out a cruiser nearby, the force of the impact sending the ship spiraling into its allies. The Eagle's fury had made its mark again, but at what cost? The ship was barely holding together, and Stone knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. "We've lost main engines," Parker reported, his voice strained. "We're drifting and shields are almost gone." Stone's heart pounded, but she refused to let fear take hold. They had fought this hard, they couldn't give up now. They had to finish it once and for all before they ran out of time, before they ran out of options. The Eagle's Fury drifted helplessly in the black void of space, its main engines down, and its shields nearly exhausted. Stone's heart raced as the ship shuddered again. Under the strain of enemy fire, the bridge was in chaos. Alarms blared and warning lights flashed across every console, but Stone stood motionless, her eyes locked onto the tactical display. As she tried to make sense of the situation, the Vrax fleet had slowed their assault for a brief moment, seemingly aware of the human ship's vulnerability. They were circling now like sharks, waiting for the kill. Stone could feel the weight of the moment. The battle was slipping away from them. They had one chance left to turn this around. "Admiral, shields are failing," Rogers said, his voice tight with urgency. "We can't withstand another hit like that. We need to make a decision now." Stone's mind raced. The situation was grim. They were surrounded, and with the Eagle's Fury out of position and severely damaged, they were sitting ducks. There was no way they could survive another wave of Vrax fire. But there was still one card to play. She knew the ship's remaining power reserves were minimal, but if she could use the last of it to launch a final assault, it might be enough to break the enemy's resolve and give humanity the edge they needed to survive. "Prepare the railguns for a full discharge," Stone ordered, her voice steady, but her hands were clenched into fists. She had to make it work. All available power to the weapons were going for broke. "But Admiral Jones," said, his voice faltering, "the systems are barely holding together. We're at critical levels." "Do it," Stone snapped, her eyes hard and unwavering. She knew the risks, but they had no other choice. If they didn't act now, the Vrax would finish them off, and humanity's last hope would be gone forever. The crew worked in frantic silence, pushing the remaining systems to their limits as the railguns powered up again. Each second felt like an eternity. The Eagle's Fury was in no condition to survive another full-scale attack, but they didn't have the luxury of time. Stone watched the tactical display carefully as the Vrax ships moved in closer and closer, their plasma weapons charging for the final strike. "Target the lead ship," Stone said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We take out their command vessel, or we die trying." Locking onto the target, Jones responded, his fingers flying over the console as the railgun's targeting systems came online for what could be their final shot. The ship's engines sputtered and groaned in protest as they fed the last reserves of power into the weapons systems, but Stone didn't flinch. She knew what had to be done. The fate of Earth was in their hands, and they would not go down without making the enemy regret ever setting their sights on humanity. "Fire," Stone commanded. The railguns fired in unison, the massive projectiles streaking out into the void with a thunderous roar. Each shot felt like a punch to the chest as they tore through space. But this time the Vrax were ready. They had anticipated the strike. Their shields flared to life, just in time to absorb the initial impact, but Stone wasn't finished yet. "Fire again," she ordered, her voice unwavering despite the odds. The second volley came almost immediately, the Eagle's Fury shuddering under the strain of its own firepower. But this time the projectiles found their mark one after another. The Vrax flagship's shields buckled under the assault, and the hull cracked open with a violent explosion. The alien ship's core detonated, sending debris scattering in all directions. "Direct hit flagship destroyed," Jones called out, his voice full of disbelief. Stone allowed herself a brief moment of triumph, but it was fleeting. The Vrax were furious now, and they would not take this defeat lightly. They were regrouping, preparing for a final push, and the Eagle's Fury was in no condition to continue the fight. "Damage reports coming in," Rogers said, his voice grim. "We're at critical levels. We need to evacuate." Stone's eyes flickered across the damage reports, her mind racing. She knew they couldn't hold out much longer. The Eagle's Fury had done its part, but now they needed a miracle to make it out alive. The Eagle's Fury drifted in the aftermath of its last strike. The explosion of the Vrax flagship still rippling through space like a dying star. The enemy fleet had pulled back slightly as if reeling from the loss, but Stone knew this reprieve would be brief. The Vrax were calculating, and they would adapt quickly. Their fury would return with vengeance. The crew was still reeling from the damage, and Stone could see the exhaustion in their eyes. The ship was in no condition to keep fighting, but Stone refused to accept that the battle wasn't over yet. There was still hope. She could feel it deep inside of her. The will to fight was still there, and they would take every chance they had left to win. "Status report," Stone said, her voice tight with tension. "We've lost power to auxiliary systems," Parker said from engineering, his voice strained. "Life support is running on backup, and we're down to a fraction of our remaining ammo." "We're out of time," Rogers said as he glanced over the tactical readout. "The wracks are reorganizing, and they're coming in hard. We won't survive another wave like that." Stone nodded, but she wasn't about to give up. The Eagle's fury had taken everything it could and was still standing, but they needed to buy more time if humanity was going to survive this battle. "Prepare all remaining fighters for launch," Stone ordered, her mind racing through every possible solution. "Send a signal to any nearby ships. We need reinforcements, and we need them now." "Admiral, reinforcements are too far out," Rogers replied grimly. "The wracks will have us before they can get here." Stone stood silently for a moment as the ship groaned under another barrage of plasma fire. The pain of the battle hung in the air. The Eagle's fury was battered beyond recognition, but it was still there, still fighting, still holding on. Stone looked around at the crew and saw the same determination reflected in their eyes. They weren't going to give up, not without a fight. "We're not running from this," Stone said quietly, her voice steady. "We're going to fight until we can't anymore. We've come too far to turn back now." She looked down at the tactical display as the wracks fleet moved in once more. The remaining ships were closing the gap fast, their weapons charged and ready to strike, but Stone saw something different this time. The wracks weren't closing in as one unit. They were scattered slightly, as if they were uncertain where to attack first. Stone knew this was their chance, their final shot to turn the tide. "All remaining firepower to the forward cannons," Stone ordered, her heart pounding. "We're going to punch through their defenses and make our escape. We hit hard and fast. We get out of here while we still can." The Eagle's fury shuddered as its remaining cannons powered up and fired on the closest enemy ship. The shot tore through the darkness and found its mark. The wrack's ship disintegrated into a massive explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through the enemy formation. But even as the debris scattered, the remaining wrack's ships closed in with terrifying speed. "Damage report," Stone said urgently as the ship began to groan under the strain of the cannon fire. "We've lost structural integrity in several sections," Parker reported. "Hull breach on deck 3. Life support is failing in multiple areas. We need to evacuate the crew if we're going to survive." Stone's heart skipped a beat, but she refused to panic. She had one last card to play. "Send the escape pods," Stone commanded, her voice firm. "Get the crew out of here. We've done enough." The crew moved swiftly. The evacuation process was already underway, but Stone didn't make a move to leave. She couldn't leave the ship now, not after everything they had fought for. It had to be her last stand. This ship had become the symbol of humanity's resistance. The Eagle's fury was more than just a warship. It was a testament to the strength of human resolve, and she would go down with it if necessary. "We're going to take one more shot at them," Stone said as she locked eyes with her crew. "We're going out fighting." The Eagle's fury drifted in the void, a ghost of its former self, battered and broken, but still defiant. Stone stood at the command console, her hand steady as she looked over the damage reports. Life support was failing. The hull was breached in multiple places, and the engines were beyond repair. The escape pods were already launching one by one, carrying the last of the crew to safety. But Stone remained resolute. She would not leave the ship, not until the very end. The wracks were closing in faster now, their ships surrounding the crippled human vessel, as if to ensure there would be no escape. Stone's heart beat faster, but her mind was clear. She knew what she had to do. "Admiral, the escape pods are all clear," Rogers said, his voice tight with concern. "You're the last one here. We need to go." Stone's eyes flickered to the tactical display. The wrack's fleet was in position now. There would be no more surprises. The time for defense was over now. It was time for humanity's final act. She knew they couldn't win this battle, not in the traditional sense, But there was still one thing they could do. They could make the enemy pay dearly for every inch of ground they had taken. "Prepare for a full-charge assault," Stone said, her voice unwavering despite the chaos around her. "All remaining power to the weapons. We're going to take out as many of them as we can before we go down." "Are you sure?" Admiral Jones asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "The ship won't survive this. The railguns are all but drained. We'll be sitting ducks." Stone's eyes hardened, and she looked out the view screen for a long moment, watching the vast array of alien ships circling the Eagle's Fury. They thought they had won, but they had no idea what humanity was capable of. Even when cornered, Stone took a deep breath and nodded. "We'll die fighting, but we'll make it count," she said simply. "The Vraxes will know who took them down. They'll remember humanity's name." "Understood," Admiral Jones said, his voice thick with emotion. But his resolve was clear, initiating final assault sequence now. The Eagle's Fury shuddered as the last of its power was diverted to the forward weapons. The remaining railguns hummed to life with a faint whine of exertion. The ship's systems strained against the pressure as if protesting their orders, but Stone wasn't going to back down. They were going to leave their mark on this battle, if it was the last thing they did. "Fire!" Stone commanded, her voice ringing out across the bridge. The railguns fired one final time, the massive projectiles cutting through space with deadly precision. The first shot slammed into the lead Vrax ship, tearing through its shields and rupturing its core. The second shot followed in quick succession, obliterating another alien cruiser. The force of the explosions was enough to shake the Eagle's Fury, but Stone didn't flinch. She watched as the explosions lit up the dark expanse of space, leaving a trail of burning debris in their wake. "Direct hits, multiple ships down," Jones reported, his voice filled with awe, but Stone didn't celebrate. There was no time for that. The Vrax fleet was already regrouping, and they were closing in. "They're coming in for the kill," Rogers said, his voice tense. "They'll hit us before we can fire again." Stone's heart pounded, but her mind remained focused. She had done all she could. Now it was up to the crew to carry the legacy forward. "Get to the escape pod," Stone said finally, her voice softening. "Take the ship's last message to Earth. Tell them we fought until the very end." As the crew left the bridge, Stone remained standing, her hand on the console. She watched as the Vrax ships closed in. And she knew this was it, but she wasn't afraid. Humanity had done its part. The legacy of the Eagle's Fury would live on. The enemy had underestimated them. They had no idea how strong humanity's will was, and as the final blow came, Stone felt no regret, only a quiet pride. The war was lost, but humanity's spirit would never break.